Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku unlocked Infinite One for All. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Pain was a language Izuku Midoriya had come to understand with grim intimacy. It spoke in the sharp, grinding dialect of splintered bone, the hot, searing prose of torn muscle, and the dull, throbbing meter of profound exhaustion. Tonight, in the chilling air of the forest, under a sky choked with smoke and the distant screams of his friends, Pain was singing an opera in his body. His left arm was a ruin, a grotesque parody of a limb that hung uselessly at his side. His right, the one he had just used to deliver a 100% smash that should have been enough, was screaming in agony, the bones fractured in a spiderweb of hairline cracks. He could feel the deep, grating ache with every shallow, ragged breath he took. Across the narrow stone plateau, the villain Muscular laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, but of cruel, predatory dominance. It was the sound of a lion enjoying the final, terrified struggles of a gazelle. His body, a monstrous testament to his quirk, was a writhing mass of crimson muscle fibers that coiled and expanded over his frame like a suit of living armor. The fake eye in his scarred socket stared blankly, a dead piece of glass that only amplified the manic glee in his real one. "Is that it?" Muscular boomed, his voice a gravelly tremor that seemed to shake the very rock beneath their feet. He flexed, and the sinews covering his body thickened, growing denser and more powerful. "I thought you were going to be a real challenge. All that talk about being a hero. You can't even protect one snot-nosed brat." His gaze flickered to the small form trembling behind Deku. Koda. The boy was frozen, his face a mask of pure terror, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. That look, the same hopeless fear Deku had seen on the faces of people cornered by the sludge villain, the same despair he himself had felt for most of his life, was a spear through Deku's heart. "You won't touch him," Deku gasped, forcing himself into a wobbly fighting stance. Each movement sent a fresh chorus of agony through his right arm. The green lightning of One for All flickered erratically around him, a storm trying to find purchase on a crumbling coastline. It felt different now. Weaker. Desperate. "Brave words," Muscular sneered, taking a heavy step forward that cracked the stone. "But what are you going to do? Your arms are shot. You're running on fumes. I've killed pro heroes who hit harder than you." He gestured dismissively at Deku's broken body. "This is the part where you lie down and die." He was right. Logic, a cold and unwelcome observer in Deku's mind, confirmed every word. His body was failing. His power, in its current state, was a suicide pact. Using it again at 100% would turn his arm into a bag of bone dust and flesh. Even then, it hadn't been enough. "I'm sorry, All Might," he thought, a wave of shame and failure washing over him. "I'm not strong enough. I couldn't live up to it." Muscular lunged. It wasn't a sophisticated attack. It was a freight train of muscle and malice, an expression of pure, overwhelming force. The world seemed to slow, every detail sharpening with adrenaline-fueled clarity. The way the moonlight glinted off Muscular's glass eye. The individual strands of muscle fiber coiling around his shoulder, preparing for a killing blow. The tiny, choked sob that escaped Koda's lips. That sound. It cut through the pain, the fear, the logic. It was the sound of a child who had already lost his parents to a villain, now about to watch his would-be savior be slaughtered in front of him. It was the sound of hope dying, and in that infinitesimal moment, something within Izuku Midoriya rejected the conclusion. Logic could say it was over. His body could scream that it was finished. But the core of his being, the very essence of the boy who had run headfirst and quirkless towards the sludge villain, refused to accept it. No, the word was not thought. It was a fundamental truth. "I will save him." He moved, his body screaming in protest. He ignored it. He pushed his ruined right arm forward, the one he had sworn he wouldn't break again. He felt the bones shift, grinding against each other. The pain was blinding, a white-hot nova behind his eyes. He needed more power. Not just 100%. That was a dam built to burst. That was a limit, a cage. He needed more. He needed everything. All the power. All the hope. all the sacrifice of the 8 souls who had carried this torch before him. He reached deep inside himself, past the pain, past the fear, past the limits of his own flesh and blood. He reached for the core of One for All, that flickering flame of inherited power. He didn't just ask for its strength. He commanded it. He poured every ounce of his will, his desperation, his absolute, unshakable need to be a hero right now, into that connection. Give me everything! The number that flashed in his mind was absurd, impossible, a child's desperate cry against the dark. 1,000,000%. He screamed it aloud, a raw, ragged battle cry that tore from his throat. Delaware. Detroit. Smash! The moment the words left his lips, the universe inside him buckled. It wasn't the familiar agony of One for All tearing him apart from the outside. This was different. This was a deep, resonant crack that originated from the very center of his soul, from the heart of the quirk itself. The pain from his broken arm vanished, not healed, but rendered insignificant, like a candle flame next to a supernova. Time stopped. The physical world, Muscular's descending fist, the terrified face of Coda, the jagged rocks of the cliffside, froze into a silent, colorless diorama. Deku was no longer on the mountain. He was adrift in a vast, starless void. It was the space he had visited in his dreams, the realm of the vestiges. But it too was different. Before it had been hazy, populated by indistinct shadows. Now, it was achingly clear. 8 figures stood before him, bathed in a soft, internal light. He saw them all. A man with a scarred face and white hair, his expression one of profound shock. A stern-looking man with spiky black hair. The bald, Gava-wearing Daigoro Banjo. The dark-haired Haikyuu Shinomori, the Gauntlet N. And Nana Shimura, her kind face now etched with disbelief, her hand half raised as if to stop him. Even the 2 earliest, most indistinct figures were sharper now, their forms solidifying in the strange, non-existent light. They weren't just watching. They were tethered to him, and they could feel the strain he was putting on their shared legacy. 9th! What are you doing? Nana's voice echoed in his mind, laced with panic. You'll destroy yourself? The quirk can't handle that kind of output. The vessel will shatter. But Deku could feel it. She was wrong. It wasn't the vessel, his body, that was breaking. It was the quirk. The very concept of a stockpile was being pushed past its breaking point. For nearly 2 centuries, One for All had been a cup, carefully filled and passed from one hand to the next. Deku, in his absolute, world-breaking desperation, had not tried to drink from the cup. He had tried to drain the ocean with it. He could feel the metaphorical structure of the quirk groaning, bending, fracturing under the impossible demand of 1,000,000%. It was a number born of a child's fantasy, a demand so illogical and absolute that the system couldn't process it. And then, standing at the forefront of the vestiges, was the first. Yoichi Shigaraki. He was thinner than the others, his form more luminous, more ethereal. His eyes, wide with an emotion Deku couldn't name, not fear, but a kind of terrifying awe, were fixed not on Deku, but on the core of the power that bound them all. A single, crystalline sound, like the chime of an immense, perfectly forged bell, rang through the void. The stockpile, the central flame of One for All, flickered violently. Then, instead of extinguishing under the strain, it began to collapse inward. The warm, golden-white light intensified, pulling the ambient energy of the void towards it. It grew smaller, denser, brighter, until it was no longer a flame, but a point of impossible brilliance, a singularity. The concept of a stockpile dissolved. The metaphor of a cup being filled and passed down evaporated. The river hadn't just overflowed its banks, the dam had not just broken. The entire river, its source, its estuary, and the ocean it fed into had collapsed into a single, infinitely dense point of self-sustaining, limitless energy. The vestiges recoiled. The chorus of panicked voices in Deku's head fell silent, replaced by a single, unified gasp of stunned reverence. They were no longer just sharing their power with him. They were now passengers, witnesses to a fundamental transformation of their very existence. The power wasn't Deku's to borrow. It was just Deku. He didn't break the vessel. Yoichi's voice whispered through the silent space, filled with a terrifying, wondrous understanding. He broke the quirk. He broke the limit. It is no longer a stockpile to be spent. In the void, the singularity pulsed, and a wave of pure, golden-green energy washed over Deku's spiritual form. There was no pain. There was only a feeling of absolute, terrifying fullness. It was the feeling of being empty and suddenly containing the universe. The chime faded. Time snapped back into place. Muscular's fist was an inch from his face. Deku's own fist, the one that should have been a mangled sack of bone fragments, was thrust forward. It wasn't covered in erratic green lightning anymore. It was enveloped in a steady, serene, golden-green aura that burned like a miniature sun, casting the entire plateau in its divine light. The skin was not broken. The bones were not shattered. His arm was whole, pristine, humming with a power so vast it felt silent. The punch connected. Or rather, the energy connected. There was no thunderous crack of impact, no shockwave of displaced air. For a single, horrifying moment, there was only silence and light. The golden-green energy that read Deku's fist did not treat Muscular's muscle armor as a physical object to be broken. It treated it as an equation to be solved. The energy flowed over him, and where it touched, Muscular's quirk simply ceased. The writhing crimson fibers did not tear or burst. They unraveled, dissolving into harmless proteins and then into particles of dust on a wave of kinetic force. Muscular's look of cruel confidence was wiped from his face, replaced by one of pure, unadulterated shock and terror. He had built his entire life, his entire identity, on the concept of being unbreakable. In that one, silent moment, he understood that he was facing something that didn't operate on the same plane of reality as breaking. The energy wave didn't stop with his quirk. It struck his body, but it did not tear him apart. Instead, it was a pure, kinetic transfer of force so immense, so absolute, that it was beyond comprehension. Muscular was launched backward not like he'd been punched, but like the planet itself had decided to personally eject him from its surface. He became a meteor, a screaming streak of light that shot across the night sky, clearing the forest, the mountains, and disappearing over the horizon in less than a second. There was no blood, no gore. He was simply gone. But the power didn't stop there. The fist Deku had thrown, the focal point of the infinite energy, unleashed the rest of its potential forward. The 1,000,000% that had been a child's desperate scream was now a physical reality. A beam of pure, kinetic force, 100 meters wide, erupted from his position. It was not fire, not light, not lightning, but the very concept of force made manifest. It struck the cliff face behind where Muscular had stood. The rock didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It vaporized. A colossal, perfectly semicircular scoop of the mountain simply vanished into fine, superheated dust. The trees, the earth, the very geology of the training ground for half a kilometer in a straight line were erased from existence. The beam of force continued upward into the sky, punching a clean, glowing hole through the cloud cover and continuing on into the blackness of space. Then came the sound. It was not the boom of an explosion. It was the sound of a vacuum being created and then collapsing as the atmosphere rushed back in. A deep, resonant thwump that shook the entire prefecture. A shockwave, clean and sharp, radiated outward, flattening trees in a perfect circle around the epicenter of the blast, their trunks snapping like twigs, and then silence. A profound, ringing silence that was more deafening than the noise it had replaced. On the newly carved precipice, Izuku Midoriya stood. He lowered his arm, looking at it with a detached sense of wonder. It was perfect. Not a scratch, not a bruise. The sleeve of his UA tracksuit was gone, atomized by the energy release, but his skin was pristine. He flexed his fingers. They obeyed instantly, without a hint of pain or protest. He looked at his left arm, the one that had been a mangled ruin moments before. It too was completely whole, the tattered remains of its sleeve fluttering around a perfectly healed limb. A steady, golden-green aura pulsed gently around his body, a visible manifestation of the infinite wellspring of power now residing within him. It felt like a low hum in his bones, a constant, effortless thrum of limitless potential. He felt no exhaustion, no strain, no backlash. He felt powerful. More powerful than he had ever dreamed, and it terrified him. Behind him, a small, scraping sound broke the silence. He turned slowly. Kota was on his hands and knees staring at him. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide as dinner plates. The tears had stopped. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, something deeper. It was the kind of awe a primitive man might feel after witnessing a bolt of lightning strike the ground before him. It was the terror of seeing something that should not be possible. He was looking at Deku, but he wasn't seeing the clumsy, mumbling boy who had tried to talk to him earlier. He was seeing the creature that had just erased a mountain and banished a monster with a silent wave of impossible light. My hero! Kota whispered, the words barely audible, spoken not in admiration, but in a kind of prayerful horror. Deku opened his mouth to say something, to reassure him, but no words came. What could he say? It's okay? I'm fine? How could he be fine? His arms had been broken. He had faced certain death. Now, he was unharmed, radiating a power that felt alien and frightening, and a man had been deleted from reality in front of them. Before he could process the thought, a new voice cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. Midoriya! Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, landed silently on the edge of the devastated clearing. His capture weapon was coiled around his shoulders, and his eyes, wide and red from the use of his quirk, scanned the scene with frantic, disbelieving speed. He had received Mandalay's desperate telepathic message. Aizawa. Kota is with Midoriya. They're fighting a villain at the cliffside. Midoriya is in trouble. He had expected to find a battlefield. He had expected to find his student broken, or worse. He did not expect to find Armageddon. His gaze snapped from the impossibly huge, clean-cut crater in the mountainside, to the flattened forest, and finally to the lone figure standing at its center. Midoriya. He was standing. Not just standing, but standing tall, seemingly without injury. Aizawa's experienced eyes, trained to spot the slightest sign of damage or exhaustion in a fighter, saw none, but he did see the light. A soft, golden-green luminescence that pulsed around the boy's frame like a heartbeat. It was an aura of power so dense, so palpable, it made the air around him feel thick and heavy. Aizawa's mind, a machine of cold logic and tactical analysis, failed to compute. The evidence before him was a paradox. The level of destruction was apocalyptic, suggesting a power output that dwarfed even All Might in his prime. But the source of that power, his problem child of a student, was completely unharmed. It was impossible. A quirk with that much power would, by every law of physics and biology he understood, have annihilated its user. Instinct took over. That aura was an unknown, an anomaly, a threat. His hair lifted. His eyes glowed with a terrifying crimson light. He activated his quirk, Erasure. He focused his full, undivided attention on Midoriya, pouring all his concentration into the act of nullifying the boy's quirk. For a split second, it seemed to work. The golden-green aura flickered, the brilliant light dimming to a faint, ethereal glow. The palpable pressure in the air lessened, but it didn't vanish. It was like trying to erase the sun. He could squint, block out the worst of the light, but he couldn't make it go away. The power wasn't a fire layered on top of the boy. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. Aizawa felt a strange sense of feedback through his quirk, a feeling he'd never experienced before. It was like pushing against a solid wall. The energy inside Midoriya was so fundamental, so absolute, that his erasure could only dampen its external expression. It couldn't touch the source. Aizawa's eyes widened further, a sliver of genuine fear piercing his stoic composure. He let his quirk drop, blinking away the sudden dryness. The golden-green aura immediately flared back to its full, serene intensity. Midoriya, what happened here? Aizawa's voice was low, strained, devoid of its usual tired drawl. Where is the villain? Deku finally found his own voice, but it came out as a shaky, confused whisper. He lifted his hands, turning them over and over, staring at the smooth, unblemished skin, the steady, unwavering glow. They felt like his hands, but they also felt like they belonged to a stranger. A stranger made of starlight and impossible strength. The fear that had been overshadowed by the sheer shock of the event now returned, cold and sharp. The humming in his bones wasn't just power. It was a question mark branded onto his soul. The vestiges were silent in his mind, their awestruck quiet more unnerving than their panicked warnings had been. He was alone with this thing that had awoken inside him. He looked from his impossible hands to his teacher's terrified, bewildered face, the full weight of the impossible event finally crashing down on him. I don't know, he stammered, his voice cracking with a child's fear. He looked at his glowing palms one last time, a tremor running through his body that had nothing to do with cold or injury. What was that? The ringing in Izuku Midoriya's ears was a high, thin wire sound, a stark contrast to the profound, bone-deep hum that had settled into his marrow. His body, which only moments ago had been a symphony of agony, was now an island of unsettling calm and a sea of devastation. He stood on the precipice of a world he had just unmade, the golden-green light of his own being casting long, dancing shadows across the obliterated landscape. Shota Aizawa's question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. What happened here? Deku's mind was a frantic scramble, trying to connect the shattered pieces of the last few minutes. There was the pain, the desperation. The impossible number screamed into the night. Then the fracture, the void. The silent, awestruck faces of the vestiges. The light. The sheer, effortless finality of his punch. I had to save him. Deku managed, his voice barely a whisper. He gestured a trembling, glowing hand towards Kota, who was still frozen in a state of terrified awe. Muscular, he was going to. I needed more power. Aizawa's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it grew harder, more analytical. He took a slow step forward, his boots crunching on loose pebbles at the edge of the new crater. His eyes flickered between Deku's pristine, radiating form and the incomprehensible destruction behind him. More power? Aizawa's voice was dangerously low. Midoriya, look around you. This isn't more power. This is an extinction event. The seismic shock was registered in Mustafa. The energy signature flared brighter on satellite than the city lights of Tokyo. Government agencies are screaming on every secure channel. What did you do? The words hit Deku like a physical blow. Extinction event. He wasn't a hero. He was a natural disaster. The humming in his bones suddenly felt less like power and more like a contaminant, a radioactive poison. Before he could spiral further, a rush of air announced new arrivals. Mandalay landed beside Kota, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror as she took in the scene. She immediately scooped the trembling boy into her arms, checking him for injuries, her hero instincts battling with the sheer shock of the vista. Izuku, she breathed, her voice shaking. By the spirits, what happened? Vlad Kings slammed down a moment later, his expression a grim mask. He, like Aizawa, was a pragmatist. He saw the scene not just as a tragedy, but as a tactical nightmare. Aizawa, report! He barked, his eyes fixed on the glowing student. Is the area secure? Where's the villain? Aizawa finally tore his gaze away from Deku. The villain is gone, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Midoriya dealt with him. Vlad's eyes narrowed. Dealt with him? Did you recover the body? Deku flinched, the memory of Muscular unraveling into dust flashing behind his eyes. He felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just defeated a villain. He had erased him. He had watched a human being, monstrous as he was, cease to exist. There is no body, Aizawa stated flatly, his gaze returning to his student, heavy with unspoken accusation. The implication was clear, and it chilled everyone present. The comms unit in Aizawa's ear crackled to life. A voice, frantic and tinny, cut through the tense silence. Eraserhead, this is Central Command. We have a confirmed visual on a high-velocity object that left your position on a ballistic trajectory. It has achieved escape velocity. I repeat, the object has broken atmosphere. Can you confirm the nature of the projectile? Silence. The four conscious people on the cliffside stared at each other. Mandalay hugged Kota tighter, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Vlad King's jaw went slack. Aizawa slowly raised his hand to his comms unit, his thumb pressing the transmit button. His voice was hollow, dead. Command, stand by. We're dealing with a situation here. He cut the connection, the silence that followed feeling somehow louder. An object. Escape velocity. They were talking about Muscular. Deku hadn't just punched him over the horizon, he had punched him into orbit. Or beyond. "We need to get you back to UA," Aizawa said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was no longer addressing his student. He was addressing the anomaly. The weapon. Now, the UA infirmary had never felt so much like a tomb. The usual scent of antiseptic and recovery girl's sweet-smelling tea was present, but it was overlaid with an atmosphere of thick, anxious tension. Deku sat on the edge of a cot, stripped to his waist. The golden-green aura had subsided at his conscious, desperate will, but the faint, internal hum remained, a constant reminder of the alien power thrumming just beneath his skin. His UA uniform, what was left of it, lay folded on a nearby chair. Across the room, a grim council had assembled. Nizu, the principal, sat perched on a stool, his paws folded neatly, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by an unnerving, placid focus. His beady black eyes darted from Deku to a tablet in his lap and back again. Aizawa stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but radiating a kind of exhausted dread. And now, the door slid open with a violent hiss, revealing the skeletal, sunken-eyed form of Toshinori Yagi. "Young Midoriya!" All Might's voice was a ragged croak, filled with a frantic paternal fear. He had been monitoring the situation from a safe distance, his heart seizing with every panicked report. He had heard about the energy spike, the devastation. He had expected to burst in and find his successor clinging to life, another sacrifice on the altar of one for all. He did not expect to find him sitting up, looking utterly, impossibly whole. Deku looked up, and the relief and guilt that flooded his face was so potent it was almost a physical thing. "All Might!" Toshinori rushed to his side, his bony hands hovering over Deku's shoulders, afraid to touch him, as if he might crumble to dust. He scanned the boy's body, his experienced eyes searching for the familiar, horrific signs of backlash, the purpled, swollen flesh, the unnatural angles of broken bones, the bloodshot eyes. There was nothing. Not a scratch. Not a bruise. Not even a hint of fatigue. The boy's skin was clear, his breathing even. He looked healthier than he had before the training camp had even started. "How?" All Might whispered, his voice trembling. "Your arms. Mandalay's message said you were broken, fighting for your life." "I was," Deku said, looking down at his own hands as if they were foreign objects. "I was broken. And then I wasn't." His regenerative capabilities appeared to have undergone a significant enhancement. Nizu interjected, his voice clinical. He tapped his tablet, and a complex graph appeared on the screen. "The energy signature we recorded was unlike any quirk on record. It didn't spike and then decay, as one would expect from a kinetic energy release. It spiked, and then it flatlined at a level of output we previously thought to be theoretical. It only vanished when Midoriya consciously suppressed it." He looked directly at Deku. "The satellite that tracked the villain, what's left of him, is a military-grade surveillance unit. It clocked his exit velocity at over 11 kilometers per second. Midoriya-kun, you didn't just hit him. You launched him into interstellar space." The sterile, factual statement landed with the force of a physical blow. Deku's stomach twisted. At that moment, Recovery Girl shuffled over, her face a mask of profound confusion. She held a scanner in one hand, her brow furrowed. "It makes no sense," she muttered, more to herself than to the room. "I've run every diagnostic I have. His cellular structure is perfect. Overly so. His mitotic rate is off the charts, but not in a cancerous way. It's as if every cell in his body is an idealized version of itself, constantly regenerating to a perfect baseline. There's no damage to heal, there's no fatigue to restore." She leaned in, peering at Deku. "Child, when I use my quirk on you, what do you feel?" Deku hesitated. I don't feel anything." Recovery Girl nodded slowly, a dawning horror in her eyes. "Exactly. My quirk works by amplifying a person's natural healing factor, using their own energy to fuel it. But when I try to use it on you, it's like trying to pour a cup of water into the ocean. There's no purchase. There's no system to amplify because your body is already in a state of perpetual, instantaneous restoration. My quirk, it has no effect on you anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Recovery girl, the woman who had literally kissed and made better every scrape, break, and mortal wound students had suffered for decades, was powerless before him. Not because he was too broken, but because he was too whole. It was another thread cut, another connection to his fragile, human past rendered obsolete. All Might sank onto the stool beside Deku's cot, the strength seeming to leave his frail body. He looked at his successor, his boy, and for the first time, he felt a chasm opening between them. This wasn't the difficult, dangerous, but ultimately understandable power he had passed on. This was something else entirely. Something divine and terrifying. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice soft and laced with a fear he couldn't hide. What did you feel? When you used the power, what was it like? Deku's gaze unfocused. The hum in his bones intensified, and the world around him seemed to grow fuzzy at the edges. The anxious faces of his mentors blurred. He was so tired, so overwhelmed. He just wanted to understand. He closed his eyes, and fell into infinity. The world that opened up to him was not the dark, hazy void of his previous visits. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a sound like a billion whispering chimes. He was standing on a floor of polished light, under a cathedral ceiling woven from constellations of pure energy. Stretching out before him were endless aisles, not of books, but of shimmering, crystalline structures that pulsed with a gentle, internal luminescence. It was a library, a cathedral, an observatory, all at once. It was the architectural manifestation of a soul. The 8 vestiges were there, but they were no longer indistinct shadows. They stood before him, their forms solid, clear, and radiant. They weren't ghosts in a machine. They were librarians in their own sanctuary. Their expressions were a mixture of awe, concern, and profound uncertainty. Nana Shimura, All Might's master, stepped forward. Her form was as clear as if she were standing there in the flesh, her kind eyes filled with a gravity that rooted Deku to the spot. Ninth, she said, her voice echoing not in his ears, but directly in his consciousness. Welcome to what remains of One for All. What is this place? Deku asked, turning in a slow circle, trying to comprehend the impossible scale of the realm. It's so different. The vessel has changed, so the space within it has changed as well, said Daigoro Banjo, the 5th user, stepping up beside Nana. He gestured with a gauntlet hand at the glowing archives. This was all just potential before. A stockpile of memories and power. But you didn't just draw from the stockpile, kid. You shattered the container. It was Nana who put it into words he could understand, her expression gentle but her message terrifying. Think of One for All as a river, Izuku, she began, using his first name, a sign of the gravity of the situation. For generations, we each added our strength to it, making the current stronger. We built a dam to hold it all, and when we passed it on, we gave the next person the key to the spillway, allowing them to release a controlled amount of its power. She took a step closer, her form shimmering. Your body was a flawed spillway. It kept breaking under the pressure. Tonight, in your desperation to save that boy, you didn't just open the spillway, you put a stick of dynamite at the base of the dam. You demanded 1,000,000%. A nonsensical, absolute demand that the system couldn't process. But the dam didn't just break. A new voice added. It was quiet, ancient, and came from the very first user, Yoichi Shigaraki. He stood slightly apart from the others, his form the most luminous, the closest to pure energy. A breaking dam would have released a flood, a finite torrent that would have destroyed you and everything around you. What you did was more fundamental. He raised a glowing hand, and the constellations above them swirled. You drilled a hole through reality. You didn't just break the dam. You tore a hole through the bedrock beneath the river, tapping directly into the infinite aquifer of creation itself. The source, Yoichi's eyes, burning with an ancient light, met Deku's. One for All is no longer a stockpile. It is no longer a legacy of power being passed down. It has become a singularity. A self-sustaining paradox, a wound in the world that bleeds infinite energy. And it is intrinsically, irrevocably, fused with your soul. It is not a quirk you have, ninth. It is what you are. The truth of it settled over Deku like a lead blanket. The hum in his bones. The effortless healing. The lack of backlash. It wasn't a bug, it was the primary feature of this new existence. The power wasn't a tool he could pick up and put down. It was the very substance of his being. So, it's infinite? Deku whispered, the word feeling blasphemous on his tongue. Yes, Nana confirmed, her voice soft with a terrible sympathy. The power you can access has no limit. Your body, now constantly reinforced and healed by that same energy, has no limit. The quirks we have gathered. She gestured to the others. Blackwhip, Float, Fa Gene. They are no longer separate abilities you must master. They are mere suggestions, dialects of the one, infinite language you now speak. You have full, intuitive mastery of them all. Deku stumbled back, his spiritual form flickering. But I don't want this. I just wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to save people. Like All Might, and you can, Yoichi said, his tone somber. You can save everyone. That is the gift of this change. But it is also the curse. A finite boy has been given an infinite power. The question is no longer whether your body can handle the strain, Izuku Midoriya. The question is whether your humanity can. The whispering chimes of the library seemed to swell, and the faces of his mentors blurred once more as the world of the infirmary resolved around him. He opened his eyes with a gasp, his heart hammering in his chest. Only a few seconds had passed. All Might, Nizu, and Aizawa were staring at him, their faces etched with concern. Young Midoriya? Are you alright? All Might asked, his hand finally resting on Deku's shoulder. Deku looked at his mentor, the man who had given him everything, and saw the worried, frail human beneath the specter of the symbol of peace. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that he had already surpassed him. Not just in power, but in kind. They were no longer the same species. I know what happened, Deku said, his voice flat, drained of emotion. He explained what the vestiges had told him, the broken dam, the singularity, the infinite source. He spoke of the power no longer being a tool, but an extension of his very being. As he spoke, Nizu's calm facade finally broke. His ears twitched, and a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a hiss and a groan, escaped his throat. Aizawa went rigid, his hand instinctively going to the capture weapon around his neck. All Might simply stared, his sunken eyes wide with a grief so profound it seemed to hollow him out even further. He had given his boy a torch to carry. Instead, he had accidentally pushed him into the heart of a star. The test took place 3 hours later, in the dead of night, at UA's most secure and reinforced training facility, Ground Gamma. The vast industrial complex of pipes, gantries, and concrete towers was bathed in the cold, artificial glare of floodlights. The audience was small and exclusive, Nizu, All Might, and Aizawa, standing on a reinforced observation platform a safe distance away. Are you certain this is wise, Principal? Aizawa asked, his arms crossed tightly, his gaze fixed on the small figure of his student standing in the center of the yard. Wise? Certainly not. Necessary? Absolutely, Nizu replied, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of scientific curiosity and abject terror. We are dealing with the single greatest military and existential shift in modern history, currently contained within the body of a 15-year-old boy. We cannot afford to be ignorant of its capabilities. All Might remained silent, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the lights. He just watched his boy, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. Down in the yard, Deku stood, feeling the cool night air on his bare torso. He felt strangely calm. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a surreal sense of detachment. The hum of the power within him was a comforting presence now, a promise that he could not be broken. Midoriya! Aizawa's voice crackled over the area's PA system. We're going to start simple. Channel 1 for all. Just 1%, Deku nodded. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and reached for the power. Before, this had been an act of will, a tensing of muscle, a bracing for impact. Now, he just had to allow it. He opened his eyes. The world did not erupt in green lightning. Instead, a serene, golden-green flame ignited around his body. It didn't crackle or spit, it flowed like liquid light, clinging to his form in a steady, silent aura. There was no pain. No strain. In fact, he felt better. stronger, more himself. The sensation was intoxicating, incredible. Niza breathed into his calm, watching the energy readings on his tablet spike. The output is clean. No chaotic discharge. It's perfectly stable. All right, Midoriya. Aizawa's voice came again. Right hand. 1%. A simple finger flick, aimed at that concrete pylon. He indicated a 10-foot thick pillar of reinforced concrete 100 meters away. Deku lifted his right hand. The golden-green fire intensified around his arm. He remembered the first time he had tried this with all might, the backlash that had turned his fingers into swollen, purple sausages. He felt a phantom twinge of that pain, a memory of his own fragility. Then he flicked his finger. The sound was not a flick. It was a sharp, concussive crack, like a high-caliber rifle shot. A tiny, compressed missile of golden-green energy shot from his fingertip, crossing the 100 meters in an instant. It struck the pylon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a web of cracks spread from the point of impact, covering the entire 10-foot thick structure. With a deep groan, the top half of the pylon sheared off and crashed to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. On the platform, the three men were silent. That, All Might finally choked out. That was not 1%. The force required to do that was closer to a cannon 30 or 40% smash. The metrics have changed, All Might, Niza said grimly. His 1% is no longer 1% of a finite stockpile. It's 1% of infinity. Which is, mathematically speaking, still infinity. He's merely controlling the rate of release. Deku stared at his finger, then at the destroyed pylon. A single, casual flick. He hadn't even felt it. Let's test the other quirks. Aizawa's voice commanded, a new edge of urgency in it. Black Whip. Can you summon it? Deku didn't even have to think about it. He lifted his left arm, and the desire for Black Whip manifested instantly. The golden-green aura around his arm darkened, coalescing into solid, tangible tendrils of pure black energy, each one shot through with veins of the same golden light. They didn't erupt wildly as they had before. They flowed from his arm like silk ribbons, hovering in the air, perfectly still, awaiting his command. He willed one to extend, and it shot out, wrapping gently around a distant pipe with millimeter precision. He could feel the texture of the rusted metal through the tendril as if it were his own skin. Float, Aizawa ordered. Deku willed himself to rise. The aura around his feet intensified, and he lifted off the ground, not with a jump or a burst of power, but with the silent, graceful ease of a helium balloon. He hovered 20 feet in the air, perfectly stable. No! Niza's voice cut in, high with excitement. Midoriya-kun, try to use them at once. Maintain float, and use Black Whip to create a defensive barrier in front of you. It was effortless. While hanging in the air, Deku gestured with both hands, and a dozen Black Whip tendrils flowed from his arms, weaving themselves together in seconds into a complex, tightly knit shield large enough to cover a bus. The movements were fluid, intuitive, as natural as breathing. He could feel every strand, control its tension and position with a mere thought. He then activated FA gene in his legs, feeling the kinetic energy build up, not in painful, discrete bursts, but as a smooth, limitless reservoir he could tap into at will. He was floating, shielded, and ready to move at hypersonic speed all at the same time, without a single bead of sweat or hint of strain. On the platform, Aizawa's hand went to his face, rubbing his tired eyes. He's not just using them. He's mastered them. In an instant. It took me years to achieve that level of fine control with my capture weapon. This changes everything. All Might whispered, his voice filled with a profound sense of sorrow. The symbol of peace was a man who pushed himself to the limit for others, a symbol of struggle and perseverance. What symbol is a god who has no limits? The final test was Niza's idea. A large projectile launcher, normally used to simulate falling debris, was rolled out. Midoriya-kun, Niza chirped over the PA. We are going to fire this projectile at you at high speed. Your task is to stop it, without destroying it. Understood, Deku replied, his voice eerily calm. He floated down to the ground, dismissing the Black Whip shield. The launcher word aimed, and with a deafening roar, fired a 5-ton block of concrete at him at over 200 miles per hour. It was a gray, hurtling blur of death. His danger sense flared, not as a painful spike, but as a cool, clear wash of information, trajectory, velocity, impact point, kinetic energy. His first instinct, the old Deku's instinct, was to brace himself and smash it. But the new Deku, the one connected to the infinite library, saw 1,000 other options. The vestiges were quiet, but their knowledge flowed through him. He saw Daigoro Banjo's creativity, Nana Shimura's grace, the second's tactical precision. He didn't punch. He didn't even move. He simply raised his hands. From his palms, hundreds of fine, thread-like tendrils of black whip, each glowing with that golden-green light, shot out. They didn't form a crude shield. They wove themselves in midair, in the split second before impact, into an impossibly intricate, multi-layered net. The concrete block hit the net. There was no crash. No boom. The net flexed, its complex geometry distributing the force perfectly across every single strand. The block decelerated from 200 miles per hour to 0 in the space of 10 feet, coming to a gentle rest in the center of the energy web as if it were being cradled in a hammock. It hung there, suspended in the air, completely unharmed. Not even a chip of concrete had flaked off. It was a display of power so absolute, so controlled, and so utterly beyond the pale of human ability that it was simply terrifying. Deku lowered the block gently to the ground and dissolved the net, the threads of light receding back into his palms. He stood there, his silent, flaming aura illuminating the yard, waiting for the next command. On the platform, no one spoke for a full minute. The test was over. The results were in. Aizawa looked at All Might, his expression grim. "Tashinori, what have you done?" All Might didn't have an answer. He just looked at the boy standing alone in the floodlights, a figure of unimaginable power who looked so terribly small. He had wanted to give him a chance to be a hero. Instead, he had cursed him with godhood. Deku looked at his hands, at the gentle, lethal light that now defined him. The vestiges had been right. The fight was no longer about his body. It was about the boy, Izuku Midoriya, who felt like he was already beginning to fade, drowned out by the silent, ceaseless hum of infinity. He thought of the power he had inherited, the sacred torch passed down through generations. The power that All Might had entrusted to him, and a single, cold thought solidified in his mind, clear and absolute as a diamond. This isn't one for all anymore. The unforeseen simulation joint was a place of ghosts for Izuku Midoriya. It was here he had first tasted the true, terrifying malice of the villain world. It was here he had watched Aizawa-sensei fight for his life, and where All Might had waged a desperate, earth-shattering battle against the Nomu. The air itself seemed to hold a phantom chill, a memory of fear and violence. Today, however, the chill was not from memory. It was from the three figures standing on the central plaza overlook, their silence as vast and imposing as the cavernous dome above them. Principal Nizu, All Might, and Aizawa watched him, their expressions a grim trifecta of clinical curiosity, paternal grief, and pragmatic dread. And below them, in the center of the plaza, stood the source of their anxiety, Deku himself. There were no villains today. There was no class to protect. There was only him, a boy of 15, and the infinite, terrifying godhood that had nested in his soul. The training session, a word that felt woefully inadequate, was Nizu's idea. A necessity he had called it. They were flying blind, and the world couldn't afford the crash. "Let us begin with creation, shall we?" Nizu's voice, amplified by the USJ's PA system, was chipper, but it held the razor-sharp edge of a scalpel. "Midoriya-kun, direct your attention to the landslide zone. The last villain attack caused considerable, and frankly inconvenient, damage to the infrastructure. There is a 50-meter chasm separating the two main plateaus. Your task, Bridget." Deku nodded, the command registering with a cool, detached clarity. He turned to face the distant, rocky terrain. The hum of the singularity within him was a constant, a baseline state of being. The golden-green aura that was his new reality pulsed gently around him, casting a divine glow in the artificial twilight of the facility. He lifted his arms. The vestiges were a silent chorus in the grand cathedral of his mind, not offering words, but impressions, feelings, raw data. He felt the fifth user's, Daigoro Banjo's, innate understanding of Black Whip flow through him, not as a lesson, but as an instinct. He saw the chasm not as an obstacle, but as a void to be filled, a question to be answered. He didn't roar or strain. He simply gestured. From his arms, the familiar black energy of Black Whip flowed, but this was a different substance entirely. It was no longer wild and chaotic. It was as pliant as clay in a master sculptor's hands, as strong as diamond. The blackness was threaded with the same golden-green light of his aura, making it look like solidified night sky shot through with nebulae. The tendrils shot across the chasm, anchoring themselves into the far cliff face with silent, perfect precision. But they did not form a simple, crude rope bridge. More tendrils flowed from him, an endless river of creation. They began to weave, to braid, to solidify. An intricate latticework formed, arches taking shape in midair, trusses and supports manifesting from nothing. In less than a minute, where there had been an empty chasm, there now stood a bridge. It was not a utilitarian slab. It was a work of art. An elegant, Gothic structure with flying buttresses and ornate railings, every surface smooth and seamless. It looked like it had been carved from a single piece of polished obsidian. It was 50 meters long, strong enough to support a tank, and he had created it from his own being in the time it would take to boil a kettle. He had not broken a sweat. He had not even breathed hard. On the overlook, the three supervisors were speechless. Aizawa stared, his jaw tight. He had spent his entire adult life mastering a single, flexible weapon. Midoriya had just demonstrated a level of fine control and raw material generation that defied every principle of quirk science he knew. The energy expenditure was negligible. Nizu murmured, his eyes glued to the tablet in his paws. The graph had barely twitched. He constructed a 20-ton structure with the metabolic effort of a brisk walk. All Might didn't look at the graph. He looked at the bridge, a monument to his successor's alien power, and then at the small, glowing figure who had created it. The pride he had once felt watching the boy struggle and succeed was gone, replaced by a profound and aching sorrow. This wasn't a struggle. This wasn't success. This was an inevitability. Next, Nizu's voice commanded, pulling Deku from his strange, creative trance. Speed and traversal. From your current position to the entrance gate. As quickly as you can. Deku looked across the vast expanse of the USJ, the flood zone, the ruins, the plaza. It seemed so large before. Now, it felt like a small room. The vestiges of the second and third users, with their intimate knowledge of speed and momentum amplification, gave him the answer before he had even asked the question. Fa Gene, the quirk of the third user, was no longer about storing kinetic energy from repetitive motions. It was about accessing the infinite wellspring directly and converting it to pure momentum. He willed the power to his legs. The aura around them brightened. He bent his knees, preparing to launch. Wait, a thought, cool and logical, slid into his mind. It felt like his own, but it also felt like the combined wisdom of 7 dead heroes. A sonic boom would cause structural damage to the dome. The air displacement could harm the observers. A silent, instantaneous relocation is more efficient. He straightened up. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing the destination. He activated float to negate his own inertia, and then fed a single, sharp, controlled burst of Fa Jin's kinetic energy into his personal space. To Aizawa, All Might, and Nizu, it was as if he had been edited out of reality. One moment, Midoriya was standing in the central plaza, glowing. The next, he was simply gone. There was no blur of movement, no gust of wind, no crack of displaced air. A split second later, Aizawa's trained eyes caught a flicker of golden-green light by the main entrance, hundreds of meters away. Midoriya was standing there, perfectly still, as if he had been there all along. What was that? Aizawa breathed, his hair standing on end not from his quirk, but from pure, primal shock. He didn't move. He just ceased to be here and began to be there. He broke the sound barrier. Nizu stated, his voice trembling with a terrifying excitement. But he used float and some form of spatial control I don't yet understand to create a pocket of still air around himself, negating the sonic boom. He didn't travel through the space. He treated the space as an inconvenience and moved it. The level of control, the processing power required. The principal's fur was bristling. It's beautiful, and it is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. The final test was the one they all dreaded. Raw power, Midoriya-kun, Niza said, his voice losing its chipper edge for the first time. We need a baseline. We need to understand the upper limits. There are no upper limits. Deku's voice replied through the PA system, flat and devoid of emotion. The statement hung in the air, a simple fact that sounded like a threat. Then we need to understand the scale of what you can control. Niza corrected himself. 100%. A Detroit smash. Aimed at the dome ceiling, a cold spike of pure terror shot through Deku's detached calm. The vestiges, who had been a silent stream of useful data, suddenly screamed in his mind. No! Nana Shimura's voice was a psychic shriek. Ninth, you can't! You don't understand. The concept of 100% is meaningless now! Daigoro Banjo yelled. It's a switch with no off position. You'll tear a hole in the world. The serene library in his soul was suddenly a hurricane of panic. Deku staggered back, clutching his head. The hum in his bones swelled into a deafening roar. He could feel the infinite power welling up inside him, eager to be unleashed, a patient god tired of being contained in a fragile, mortal shell. The demand for 100% was like a key turning in a lock that should never be opened. I can't, he gasped, his voice shaking for the first time that day. You don't understand. It's not a number anymore. It's everything. If I try, I don't think I can stop it. On the platform, All Might took a step forward. Nizu, that's enough. Can't you see you're scaring him? Fear is a valuable data point, All Might. Nizu retorted, though his eyes were wide with alarm. But he is correct. A change of plan. Midoriya-kun, don't give us 100%. Give us the smallest fraction you can possibly manage. 0.001%. A single, directed punch. Aim for the sky. Deku took a shuddering breath, trying to push back the screaming chorus in his head. The smallest fraction. It was like trying to take a single molecule of water from an ocean. He extended his fist towards the domed ceiling. The golden-green aura around his arm flared, brighter and hotter than before. He focused all his will, all his control, on the idea of a tiny release. He gritted his teeth, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple, the first sign of effort he had shown all day. He pushed. The world went white. A pillar of pure, golden-green light, no thicker than his arm, erupted from his fist. It shot upward with impossible speed. It did not punch a hole in the USJ's reinforced glass dome. It passed through it as if it weren't there, the atoms of the glass momentarily disassociating and then reforming in its wake. The beam continued into the sky above. A second later, a new star bloomed in the daytime sky. A flash of light so brilliant it was visible for miles, as if a piece of the sun had been chipped off. Back inside the USJ, the aftershock hit. The entire colossal structure groaned. A spider web of immense cracks spread across the dome from the point of impact, the sound of 1,000 panes of glass screaming in protest. The pillar of light had imparted so much kinetic energy into the structure as it passed through that it had nearly shattered the entire thing. Deku fell to his knees, his arm dropping to his side. He was breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from sheer abject terror. That was the smallest amount he could manage. That was his version of a tap. He looked at his hand, the one that had just casually punched a hole in the sky. It wasn't a hand anymore. It was a weapon of mass destruction he couldn't put down. The training was over. The results were clear. There was no limit. There was no struggle. There was only a boy who was too scared to move for fear of breaking the world. The transition back to the quiet mundanity of the Heights Alliance dorms was a form of psychological whiplash. Here, his classmates were laughing, arguing over who had to do the dishes, and complaining about homework. They were gloriously, beautifully normal. And Deku had never felt more alienated from them in his life. He sat at his desk, an All Might poster smiling down at him in bitter irony. In front of him was a physics worksheet from ectoplasm. Problem 1, Calculate the trajectory and force needed for a 15 kilograms object to clear a 30-meter wall when launched at a 45-degree angle. He looked at the problem, and his new mind, his infinite mind, answered it instantly. But it didn't just give him the answer. It gave him all the answers. A flood of data poured into his consciousness, unbidden. Trajectory calculated. Force required, 4.5 kilonewtons. However, this assumes a vacuum. With standard air resistance, a 7% increase in initial force is required. This also fails to account for the Magnus effect if the object is spinning, or potential wind shear above 20 meters. A more efficient launch angle would be 48.2 degrees to maximize range while minimizing airtime exposure to crosswinds. Alternatively, the object could be reshaped into an aerodynamic teardrop to reduce drag by 18.4%, thus requiring less initial force. He squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the sides of his head. It wouldn't stop. The vestiges weren't speaking, but their combined knowledge, their analytical skills honed over a lifetime of hero work, were now an integrated part of his own thought process. He couldn't just think anymore. He had to compute. It was everywhere. Danger sense, the quirk of the fourth user, Haikichinamori, was no longer a simple alarm. It had transformed into a low-level, omnipresent hum of precognition. He was constantly aware of 1,000 tiny dangers in a multi-mile radius. A loose screw on the dorm's rooftop air conditioning unit, threatening to fall in 3 days. A microscopic crack forming in the ceramic of Kirishima's favorite mug. Ida's shoelace, which had a 12% chance of coming undone and causing him to stumble on the stairs. It was a constant, maddening stream of useless, anxiety-inducing information. He felt a presence at his door and knew it was Uraraka before her knuckles even rapped against the wood. Her heart rate was slightly elevated, a sign of social anxiety. Her breathing was shallow. The probability of her asking him if he was okay was 97.3%. Deku-kun? She called softly. Can I come in? He forced the data down, pushed the computations away. He tried to find the real Izuku, the boy who would be happy and flustered to see his friend. Sure, Uraraka-san, come in, he said, his voice sounding unnervingly calm and even to his own ears. She entered, wringing her hands slightly, her kind face etched with concern. Hey! We didn't see you at dinner. I saved you a plate. Are you okay? You've been quiet since the camp. He tried to smile. He felt the muscles of his face move, but it felt like puppetry. I'm fine. Just tired. A lot has been on my mind. Lie, his mind supplied instantly. Physiological signs indicate zero fatigue. Cortisol levels are nominal. The subject is not tired. The subject is existentially distressed. Oh. Okay, she said, clearly not believing him. She took a step closer. It's just, you seem different. At the training exercise today, I saw the sky flash from my window. Was that? He couldn't meet her eyes. He looked at his hands, the faint golden glow still visible under the skin if he concentrated. It's my quirk. It's changed. Is that a good thing? She asked, her voice full of genuine hope for him. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her that he was a prisoner in his own body, that he was drowning in an ocean of power he never asked for, that he was scared he was losing himself. Instead, the analytical part of his brain took over, offering the most efficient, reassuring answer. It's more powerful. And I have more control. It will allow me to be a better hero. The words were true. And they were the biggest lie he had ever told. They spoke of the power, not the cost. Uraraka's expression relaxed slightly, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. He could see the distance between them widening with every calm, measured word he spoke. He was a perfect, reassuring machine, and it was pushing her away. Later that night, unable to sleep, he went down to the common room. The lights were dim, the air still and quiet. He just needed to be somewhere else, somewhere his own thoughts weren't so loud. He was pouring a glass of water when a voice, rough and familiar, cut through the silence. So, you're finally done pretending, Deku turned. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning against the kitchen entryway, arms crossed, his red eyes narrowed in the dim light. He wasn't posturing or shouting. He was watching Deku with an unnerving, predatory stillness. Kakin, Deku said, his voice quiet. I couldn't sleep. Cut the crap, Deku, Bakugo growled, pushing off the wall and taking a few steps closer. He circled Deku like a shark, his eyes scanning him from head to toe. I saw the training logs. I was a damn fool for leaving them on the faculty network, but I saw them. Perfect control. Negligible energy expenditure. Instantaneous mastery. What a load of crap. Deku's grip tightened on his glass. He braced himself for the usual explosion, the insults, the challenge. But it didn't come. Bakugo stopped in front of him, his expression not one of rage, but of something far more unsettling, disgust. All my life, Bakugo began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You've been this pathetic, crying, useless nerd. Then you get this quirk, and you're still a damn mess, breaking your bones, crying after every fight, sweating and bleeding and struggling for every single inch. You were still pathetic, but you were fighting. He jabbed a finger towards Deku's chest. But this thing you are now? I've been watching you. You walk around like you're half asleep. You don't get tired. You don't get hurt. I saw what you did at the USJ. There was no effort. No fire. No damned struggle. Bakugo leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. There's no sweat, no broken bones, no fight in it. It's like you're just breathing. It's creepy. You're not even a real person anymore. You're just a thing that happens. What's the point of me trying to beat you if there's no you left to beat? Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Not to Deku's body, but to his soul. Bakugo, in his own brutal, unrefined way, had seen right through the facade of power and control and had put a name to the horror that was consuming him. It's creepy. You're not even a real person anymore. No fight in it. The fight was everything. The struggle was the entire point. His willingness to break himself for others was the only thing that had ever made him feel like a hero. Without it, what was he? The analytical part of his brain, the part that was no longer entirely his, tried to offer a rebuttal. Bakugo's assessment is based on an emotional, illogical premise. The lack of struggle is a sign of efficiency, not a loss of self. But for the first time since the transformation, Deku's own feelings roared back with enough force to silence the machine. A wave of pure, desperate anguish washed over him. Bakugo was right. He was right. Deku didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just stood there as the truth of Bakugo's words stripped him bare. The calm, detached mask he had been wearing shattered, and the sheer, crushing weight of his new reality became visible in his eyes. He looked lost. He looked small. He looked utterly, completely alone. Bakugo seemed taken aback by the profound silence, the sheer devastation in Deku's expression. He had expected a fight, a denial, something. He hadn't expected to see the last flicker of the boy he knew be extinguished right in front of him. With a quiet "TCH," he turned and stalked away, leaving Deku alone in the silent common room. Deku looked down at the glass of water in his hand. With a thought, he could freeze it solid or boil it to steam. With a flick of his finger, he could send it through the wall. He possessed a power beyond gods and demons. And in that moment, all he felt was the crushing, unbearable weight of infinity. He had the power to save the world, but he was terrified he had already lost himself. Principal Nise's office, normally a place of quirky comfort filled with the scent of fine tea and the soft rustle of paperwork, had been transformed into a cold, sterile courtroom. The air was thick with the unsaid, heavy with the weight of consequence. Izuku Midoriya sat on a plush sofa that felt as hard as concrete, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. He was wearing his full school uniform, a deliberate choice by Aizawa to remind everyone present that he was, first and foremost, a student. A child. It wasn't working. Across from him, behind Nise's polished mahogany desk, sat the new arbiters of his fate. They were not heroes. They were something far more powerful and infinitely more dangerous, bureaucrats. The delegation from the Hero Public Safety Commission was led by its president, a woman named Yakamitsu Kaname. She was sharp and severe, dressed in a tailored gray suit that seemed to absorb the light in the room. Her hair was pulled back in a ruthlessly efficient bun, and her eyes, behind a pair of thin-rimmed glasses, were chips of obsidian, constantly analyzing, assessing, and calculating. She did not look at Deku with concern or fear. She looked at him the way a nuclear physicist looks at an unstable isotope. Flanking her were two aides who mirrored her cold professionalism. To Deku's right, near the window, Aizawa stood like a sentinel, his arms crossed, his entire posture a study in barely contained hostility. Beside Deku on the sofa, Toshinori Yagi sat hunched, his skeletal form seeming to shrink with every passing second, the weight of his guilt a physical presence in the room. Niza himself sat calmly in his oversized chair, a fresh cup of tea steaming before him, his beady eyes betraying none of the furious calculations firing within his hyper-intelligent mind. "Let us not mince words," President Yakamitsu began, her voice as crisp and bloodless as a legal document. "The event at your training facility, what international intelligence agencies are now referring to as the Kamino Singularity event, was not contained. Its energy signature was recorded by every major government on the planet. The footage of the altered topography, which you so naively attributed to a gas explosion, has been analyzed by every satellite in orbit. The world, a very specific and powerful part of it, knows that something unprecedented now resides at UA High School." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "They know it resides within him." Her gaze fell upon Deku, and for the first time, he felt the full, crushing force of his new reality. He was no longer a person. He was a geopolitical event. His internal computational sense, a maddeningly constant companion, kicked in. President Yakamitsu's heart rate, a steady 65 BPM. No discernible stress indicators. Her statement is a prepared opening, designed to establish absolute authority and disarm opposition. "What do you want?" Aizawa's voice was a low growl, cutting through the tense silence. Yakamitsu's lips curved into something that was technically a smile but held no warmth. "What we want, Eraserhead, is to prevent global destabilization. What we have is a boy, a well-meaning but emotionally volatile teenager, who now wields a power that, by our most conservative estimates, could fracture a tectonic plate. He is, for all intents and purposes, the single most powerful weapon on Earth. And he has no training, no psychological resilience for that burden, and no official oversight." She folded her hands on the desk. "This is not a criticism. It is a fact. And as of this morning, it is a fact that the HPSC is taking under its direct and exclusive jurisdiction." All Might stirred, his voice a ragged plea. "President, he is my student. My successor. He is a boy with a good heart who only wants to be a hero. To treat him as a weapon, your sentiment is admirable, All Might." Yakamitsu cut him off smoothly, her tone making it clear his sentiment was, in fact, irrelevant. "But your era, the era of the singular, emotionally driven symbol, is what led us to this precarious position. You passed on a power you barely understood, and it has mutated into something beyond anyone's control. We will not make the same mistake. Control is now the absolute priority." Niza finally spoke, his voice dangerously light. "And what does this direct jurisdiction entail, precisely?" "It entails a new protocol," Yakamitsu said, her aide sliding a tablet across the desk. "Project Chimera. A misnomer, I admit, as he is not a hybrid of many things, but a singularity of one. Effective immediately, Izuku Midoriya will be placed under a Level 7 containment and observation protocol." Deku's blood ran cold. Containment. It was the word they used for high-level villains in Tartarus. "He will continue to reside at UA, as moving him would cause a panic and present a security risk," she continued, as if discussing logistics for a school trip. "However, his participation in standard class curriculum is hereby suspended." "What?" Aizawa exploded. "You can't be serious. You're isolating him? The worst possible thing for a kid his age. He is no longer a standard kid his age," Yakamitsu countered, her voice hardening. "His presence in a combat exercise with other students poses an unacceptable risk of catastrophic injury. His participation in a rescue drill is equally untenable. What if he miscalculates and brings a building down? What if he punches a villain and the resulting shockwave levels a city block? Every action he takes must now be weighed against the potential for apocalyptic collateral damage." She looked at Deku again, her eyes piercing. "Can you, Izuku Midoriya, guarantee with 100% certainty that you will never lose control? Never get angry? Never misjudge your own strength when the lives of your friends are on the line? Deku opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't make that guarantee. The incident with Muscular was proof of that. His power was born from a moment where he had lost control, where desperation had overridden reason. His silence was her victory. As I thought, she said. His curriculum will be replaced by a specialized regimen designed by our top quirk theorists and psychologists. He will be studied. His power will be catalogued. His psychological state will be monitored 24 hours a day. He will be assigned a personal HPSC liaison who will be his handler and constant companion. All of his communications will be monitored. He will not be permitted to leave UA grounds without the explicit, written consent of my office. It was a cage. A comfortable, well-appointed cage, but a cage all the same. A gilded cage, built of concern and studded with the hard diamonds of national security. You're putting him in solitary confinement, All Might whispered, his voice trembling with rage and despair. We are putting an untriggered nuclear bomb in a reinforced bunker. Yakamitsu corrected him, her patience wearing thin. It is not a punishment. It is a logical, necessary precaution for the safety of this nation and the world. When, and only when, we are confident that he is stable and controllable, we will begin a phased integration program for his deployment as a strategic asset. Asset. The word echoed in the silent space where Deku's soul used to be. Not a hero. Not a student. An asset. A tool to be deployed. I will not allow it, Niza said, his cheerful demeanor gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. He is a student of UA. He is under my care. Yakamitsu leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Principal Nizu. I have a file on my desk detailing the Tartarus breakout orchestrated by All for One, an event that occurred while All Might was employed by you. I have another file on the catastrophic villain attack on your training camp, which put the lives of 24 minors at risk. A word from me, and the public will see UA not as a bastion of heroism, but as a reckless, negligent institution that has endangered the public twice in as many months. A third strike, especially one of this magnitude, would see this school shut down permanently. It was blackmail, pure and simple. Checkmate. Niza's fur bristled, but he slowly, deliberately, picked up his teacup and took a sip. He placed it down with a soft click. The terms are draconian. But I understand the Commission's position. UA will cooperate. For now. The last two words were almost silent, but they hung in the air with the weight of a future war. The fight was over. The HPSC had won. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had inherited the will of the symbol of peace, was now the property of the state. The new reality set in with a brutal, soul-crushing swiftness. The next morning, Deku walked with his friends towards the heroics training grounds, a familiar, comforting routine. He was trying to pretend things were normal, laughing at a joke Kaminari made, discussing strategies with Ida. For a few precious moments, the weight of infinity seemed to lift. They were 10 feet from the door when a man stepped out, blocking their path. He was tall, lean, and wore the same kind of nondescript suit as the HPSC aides. His face was sharp and impassive, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Izuku Midoriya, the man said, his voice flat and impersonal. I am Agent Tsurugi. I am your assigned liaison. Ida immediately stepped forward, his hand chopping the air. Pardon the intrusion, sir, but we have a class to attend. We must not be tardy. Agent Tsurugi didn't even look at him. His gaze was locked on Deku. Your schedule has been amended, Midoriya. You will not be attending this class. You will be accompanying me to Research Lab Gamma for your initial assessment. The blood drained from Deku's face. His friends stared confused. What? Why? Uraraka asked, stepping forward, her brow furrowed with concern. He's part of our class. His educational needs have been re-evaluated. Tsurugi stated, the sentence a perfect wall of bureaucratic deflection. This is not open for discussion. Midoriya, come with me. It wasn't a request. Deku looked at the confused, worried faces of his friends. He saw Kirishima's hand clench, saw Todoroki's eyes narrow, saw Uraraka take a protective step closer to him. If he resisted, they would back him up. They would fight for him. And he, in turn, would be forced to protect them, possibly from agents of the HPSC. His internal mind flashed with a dozen scenarios, all of them ending in disaster, in him revealing his power, in his friends getting hurt. The cage wasn't just made of rules. It was made of his love for his friends. It's okay, Deku said, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass in his mouth. It's a special project. For my quirk. I'll see you guys at the dorm. He turned and walked away with Agent Tsurugi, not daring to look back at the stunned silence he left behind. With every step, he felt the distance between himself and his old life stretch into an impassable chasm. His days became a sterile loop of tests and observation. He spent hours in reinforced labs, creating and dismissing black-whip constructs for analysis. He ran on oversized treadmills while scientists measured his energy output. He sat through long, grueling sessions with HPSC psychologists who tried to map the terrain of his mind, asking him endless questions about his emotional state, his childhood, his feelings about All Might. He was a specimen in a jar. He answered their questions calmly and evenly, his computational mind providing the most stable, non-alarming responses. He performed their tasks with flawless precision. He was the perfect subject, compliant, efficient, and utterly empty. In the evenings, he would return to the Heights Alliance dorm, a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. His friends would try to include him, but the presence of Agent Tsurugi, always lurking silently in a corner of the common room, made it impossible. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a strained, awkward politeness. They didn't know the truth, only that Deku was now separate, different, under the watch of the government. He became a spectator. He watched them spar, watched them laugh, watched them live the life that had been stolen from him. And the whole time, the infinite power hummed beneath his skin, a constant, mocking reminder of his own imprisonment. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. The common room was filled with the low murmur of the television. Most of Class 1A was gathered, watching the evening news. Deku sat on a sofa slightly apart from the others, Agent Tsurugi standing impassively by the doorway. Suddenly, the broadcast was interrupted by a breaking news alert. The screen cut to a shaky, aerial shot of the Muzurafu shopping district, a place they all knew well. Smoke was pouring from a dozen buildings. The reporter's voice was frantic. Repeat, a coordinated attack is underway. We have confirmed sightings of at least 2 Hien Nomu, similar to the one seen at the Kamino incident. Pro-heroes are on the scene, but they are facing heavy resistance. The camera zoomed in. They saw Endeavor, his flames raging, locked in a brutal contest of strength with a hulking, four-armed Nomu whose skin seemed to bubble and reform around his fiery fists. A second Nomu, a grotesque, bird-like creature with exposed brains, was terrorizing a different street, its shrieks shattering windows. Heroes like Hawks and Mirko were there, but they were being overwhelmed, forced into a defensive battle to evacuate civilians. Deku's body went rigid. His danger sense, which had been a low, maddening hum, erupted into a screaming siren in his mind. It wasn't just a general warning, it was a flood of specific, agonizing data. Structural integrity of the North Tower at 34%. Imminent collapse in 90 seconds. 21 civilians trapped on the upper floors. The bird Nomu's sonic attacks are causing microfractures in the elevated train line. Probability of catastrophic failure, 68% and rising. He could see it all. He could feel it all. And his mind, his terrible, perfect mind, was already solving the problem. Optimal strategy. Instantaneous relocation to the North Tower's roof. Utilize a wide-field black-whip net to secure falling debris and create an evacuation slide. Time to complete 4 seconds. Simultaneously engage bird Nomu with a focused kinetic burst of 0.002%, sufficient to disable its sonic organ without collateral damage. Engage primary Nomu with a targeted energy unraveling at the cellular level. Total time to neutralize all threats and secure all civilians, 12.7 seconds. He had the perfect plan. He had the infinite power to execute it. He could end this. Right now. The frantic sounds from the TV, the screams, the explosions, were a physical torment. He saw a family huddled behind a burning car, the four-armed Noma swatting aside a pro-hero and turning its dead eyes towards them. That was it. He couldn't sit here. He couldn't be a spectator to a slaughter he had the power to prevent. He stood up. The golden green aura, which he had kept suppressed for days, flared to life around him, bathing the dim common room in its ethereal light. The low hum in the room was suddenly him. His friends all turned, their eyes wide with shock at the sudden, immense pressure in the air. Midoriya, sit down! Agent Tsurugi's voice was sharp, a command. Deku ignored him. His eyes were locked on the television screen. On the family. On the approaching monster. He took a step towards the door. In a blur of motion, Tsurugi was in front of him, blocking his path. The man's impassive face was now set like granite. Your deployment has not been authorized, Tsurugi stated, his hand resting on a device on his belt. Stand down, there are people dying. Deku's voice was a low, guttural tremor, the sound of a god trying to speak through a mortal throat. I can save them. You are not authorized, Tsurugi repeated, his voice cold as steel. The potential for catastrophic error is too high. Your emotional state is compromised. We cannot risk you leveling the district to save one family. The HPSC's official stance is to contain and manage, not to deploy the ultimate deterrent on a domestic field. Every word was a nail in his coffin. They would rather let people die than risk him making a mistake. They would rather accept a dozen casualties than risk the political fallout of him saving them. On the television, the North Tower groaned. A huge crack snaked up its side. The reporter screamed. The camera shook violently as the building began to collapse, pancaking floors onto one another in a horrifying cascade of concrete and steel. The civilians, his mind shrieked. 21 souls. A strangled cry escaped Deku's lips. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. The power in him surged, the golden green light flaring so brightly that his friends had to shield their eyes. The floor beneath his feet began to crack. Stand down, Midoriya! Tsurugi shouted, drawing his sidearm, not a gun, but a sophisticated energy weapon designed to disrupt quirks. Deku looked from the collapsing building on the screen to the agent blocking his way. He could disable Tsurugi in a microsecond. He could be at the disaster site before the agent even hit the floor. But then what? He would be a rogue agent. A weapon that had broken its leash. He would be hunted. His friends, his school, all might. They would all pay the price for his defiance. Yakumitsu's threat about shutting down Ye echoed in his head. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. By his power, by his love, by his own heroic heart. The light around him died. The immense pressure in the room vanished. The cracks in the floor ceased to spread. The screaming in his mind went silent, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. He slowly sank back onto the sofa, his body trembling. He stared at the television, at the plume of dust where a building once stood, where 21 people had just died. He stared at his own hands, glowing faintly in his lap, humming with the useless, infinite power to have saved them all. Uraraka rushed to his side, her hand hovering over his shoulder, too scared to touch him. Deku-kun, she whispered, her voice full of a terror and confusion she couldn't possibly comprehend. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just watched the screen, his face a blank mask of despair. The news report continued, the frantic sounds of a battle for survival filling the room. But Deku heard nothing. He was listening to the silent screams of the people he had been forced to let die. He was in a cage, not of steel and concrete, but of logic and love. And it was the strongest prison ever built. He was the most powerful being on the planet, and in that moment, he had never felt so utterly, agonizingly powerless. The darkness of Tartarus was absolute, a physical presence that seeped into the bones and chilled the soul. It was a place designed not just to contain bodies, but to break minds. For most inmates, it was a silent, unending purgatory. But for the man in the deepest, most secure cell, it was merely an inconvenience. A quiet room in which to think. All for one did not need light to see or sound to hear. He perceived the world through the symphony of quirks he had collected over a century of patient, predatory acquisition. He could feel the anxious heartbeats of the guards on the upper levels, taste the metallic tang of the automated security systems, and sensed the subtle ebb and flow of power throughout the entire nation. And for the past week, he had been sensing a tsunami. The Kamino Singularity event, as the fools in the HPSC were calling it, had not just been a flare of power on their instruments. For all for one, it had been a seismic shock to his very being. The quirk he had bestowed upon his foolish, idealistic brother, the quirk he had cultivated like a prize rose for generations, intending to one day reclaim it in its full, ripened glory, had done something impossible. It had not just grown stronger. It had changed. He had felt the moment of its transformation, a deep, resonant chime that had echoed through the very fabric of the quirk world. The stockpile was gone. The carefully constructed vessel had shattered, and in its place was a gateway, a wound in reality that bled pure, untainted power. It was no longer something he wanted to steal. Stealing it would be like trying to steal the concept of gravity. It was now something he had to understand. Something he had to test. This ninth user, this Izuka Midoriya, was no longer just the next obstacle. He was the most fascinating and dangerous variable to enter the world in a century. A boy with the power of a creator god, trapped in the mind of a sentimental hero. It was a paradox of exquisite beauty. A masterpiece of unintentional irony. All for one smiled, a grotesque stretching of scarred flesh hidden behind his life support mask. The time for quiet contemplation was over. It was time to pull on the strings he had so carefully laid. A subtle pulse of will, a telepathic whisper through a long-dormant quirk he had gifted to a disgruntled Tartarus engineer years ago, was all it took. A single line of code was altered, a single safety protocol was bypassed. On the levels above, alarms began to shriek. The sound was music to his ears. The Tartarus breakout was a brutal, efficient masterpiece of chaos. The prison's own automated defenses turned on the guards. Cell doors slid open. The worst of the worst, villains whose very names were whispered like curses, were unleashed into the pandemonium. It was a distraction, a glorious, bloody smoke screen for his true purpose. As heroes scrambled to contain the mass escape, All for One simply walked out, the walls of his prison cell peeling away like fruit skin under the force of a dozen coordinated quirks he activated at once. His first stop was Dr. Garaki's hidden laboratory. The terrified doctor bowed low, presenting his master with his new body, a younger, more powerful clone, perfected and waiting. The transfer was quick. The old, broken form was discarded like a worn-out coat. He took a breath with fresh lungs, flexed fingers that were not scarred, and felt the full, unbridled might of his arsenal return. He was whole again. And he was very, very curious. The boy, All for One said, his new voice smooth and resonant, a chilling echo of the man he once was. The ninth. What is his status? Dr. Garaki trembled, consulting a monitor. He is contained, Master. The HPSC has him under observation at UA. They're treating him like an unexploded bomb. All for One laughed, a rich, genuine sound of amusement. Fools! They are trying to put a leash on a hurricane. They think the danger is the power. The real danger is the boy holding it. They are trying to cage the god, but they are starving the man. And a starving man will do anything to eat. He looked at a map of Japan, a predator choosing his new hunting ground. He didn't want a direct confrontation. Not yet. He wanted to set the stage. He wanted to create a scenario so perfectly, so cruelly designed, that the boy would have no choice but to break his cage. Prepare the Nomu. All for One commanded. The Hyans. And send a message. An open broadcast. Let's give the world a show. And let's give our little god a challenge worthy of his new divinity. The news alert hit the Heights Alliance common room like a physical blow. It wasn't a shaky cam from a news helicopter this time. It was a professionally produced video, hijacking every broadcast channel, every public screen, every streaming service in the country. The face that appeared was handsome, unscarred, and framed by a shock of pure white hair. He stood before the ruins of the Kamino Ward, a place still synonymous with All Might's fall. It was the face of All for One, but a version the world had never seen, youthful and terrifyingly vital. Greetings, citizens of Japan. He began, his voice a smooth, charismatic baritone that dripped with condescension. I apologize for the interruption. My name is All for One. Some of you may remember me as the boogeyman your former symbol of peace defeated. As you can see, reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. He gestured to the ruins behind him. This was a monument to a lie. The lie of the symbol of peace. The lie that one man, one hero, could solve all your problems. But heroes are flawed. They are weak, they break. His expression turned serious, almost mournful. And sometimes, the power they wield breaks them. There is a new power in your midst. A boy named Izuku Midoriya. The HPSC, in their infinite wisdom, would have you believe he is the next coming of All Might. This is another lie. The screen split. On one side was All for One. On the other, crystal clear satellite imagery of the mountain range near the forest training camp, showing the colossal, perfectly carved scoop that had been erased from existence. This, All for One said, gesturing to the image, is not the work of a hero. This is the work of an anomaly. A power that has grown beyond its purpose, like a cancer. A power that has consumed its host. The boy you knew as Izuku Midoriya is gone, replaced by a walking apocalypse in a school uniform. An entity your government is so terrified of, they have locked him away, hoping he won't miscalculate and unmake a city. In the UA common room, a collective gasp went through the students. Deku, sitting in his customary isolation, felt 100 pairs of eyes fall on him. Agent Tsurugi, standing by the door, was already speaking frantically into his wrist communicator. All for One's face filled the screen again, his eyes seeming to stare directly at Deku. I, however, do not fear this power. I am fascinated by it. I wish to see what it can do. So I am issuing a challenge, not to the heroes, not to the government, but to you, Izuku Midoriya. He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. Come and face me. Here in Kamino. Prove to the world that you are a hero, and not the monster I claim you are. Or you can remain in your gilded cage, but know this, for every minute you delay, a price will be paid. My children are restless. The screen changed again, showing live feeds from a dozen locations across the ward. Hai and Nomu, grotesque and powerful, were beginning to stir, but they were not attacking. They were simply waiting, their dead eyes fixed on the terrified populace. It was a hostage situation on a city-wide scale. The choice is yours, little god. All for One's voiceover concluded. Show them a savior, or show them a coward. The clock is ticking. The broadcast ended. The common room was plunged into a stunned, deafening silence. Every eye was on Deku, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a dawning horror in their expressions. Deku didn't look at them. He was looking at his hands. The golden-green light was already beginning to pulse beneath his skin. This wasn't like the attack on the shopping district. This wasn't a disaster he had to witness from afar. This was a challenge. A trap. A gauntlet thrown directly at his feet. All for One wasn't just attacking a city. He was attacking the very core of Deku's being, his need to be a hero. Midoriya, do not move! Agent Tsurugi commanded, his voice strained. He had his hand on his weapon. The president has ordered a full lockdown of UA. No one in or out. A pro-hero squadron is being dispatched to Kamino. Deku heard him, but the words were distant, meaningless. The only thing he could hear was All for One's taunt. Show them a savior, or show them a coward. The only thing he could feel was the silent screams of the people in Kamino, their lives hanging by a thread, waiting for him. He thought of the 21 people who died in the North Tower. He thought of his powerlessness, his forced inaction. The memory was a fresh, bleeding wound. He would not let it happen again. He closed his eyes. The world of the library, the singularity, opened up to him. The vestiges were a storm of conflicting emotions. It's a trap, Ninth! Nana Shimura warned, her voice frantic. He's trying to provoke you, to make you reveal the full extent of your power on a public stage. He speaks the truth. The second user, a grim-faced man whose name he still didn't know, countered. The strategic value of inaction is zero. The populace will see you as a tool of a failed state. You must act. He is not trying to beat you physically. Yoichi Shigaraki's voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. He is trying to break you mentally. He wants to force you to become the cold, calculating god he believes you are. to prove his point to the world. Deku opened his eyes. The debate was irrelevant. There were people in danger. His path was clear. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He wasn't speaking to Tsurugi or his friends. He was speaking to the rules, to the cage, to the life that was no longer his. He looked at Agent Tsurugi. "Don't try to stop me." The golden-green aura around him exploded into a silent, brilliant inferno of light. The pressure in the room became immense, forcing his classmates back, making the very air crackle with energy. Tsurugi raised his weapon. "I am ordering you to stand down." Before he could pull the trigger, a single, impossibly fast tendril of black, star-shot energy whipped from Deku's arm. It didn't strike Tsurugi. It wrapped around his weapon, constricted, and crushed it into a twisted ball of metal and plastic with a soft crunch. Deku took a step, and the world outside the dorm windows seemed to bend. He wasn't just walking. He was warping the space around him. His friends cried out his name, Uraraka, Ida, Bakugo, their voices a mixture of fear and plea. He paused at the door, his back to them, the light from his body casting their terrified faces in stark relief. "If I don't go," he said, his voice resonating with a power that was no longer just human, "he wins. He proves that I'm not a hero. And I will not let that happen." He didn't use the door. He simply vanished. One moment he was there, a silhouette of impossible light. The next, he was gone. The only evidence he had ever been there was the lingering pressure in the air, and the crushed remains of an HPSC weapon on the floor. The sky above Kamino Ward was gray with smoke and fear. All for One stood atop a ruined skyscraper, a king surveying his chosen battlefield. He could feel the boy approaching, a comet of righteous fury tearing through the fabric of the city. He smiled. The pawn had taken the bait. A golden-green meteor streaked across the sky and slammed into the plaza before him, the impact silent but cracking the pavement for 50 yards in every direction. The light subsided, revealing Izuku Midoriya, his school uniform tattered from the atmospheric friction of his flight, his eyes blazing with celestial fire. He stood amidst the destruction he had caused, a god descending to a mortal plane. "I'm here!" Deku's voice boomed, amplified by his own power. "Let them go." "So polite." All for One chuckled, his voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. "You've come to play the hero. How quaint. But a god does not make demands, little one. He makes choices." With a subtle flick of his will, he gave the command. The Nomu across the ward began to move. Not all at once. Selectively. A monstrous, multi-limbed creature smashed its fists into the support pillars of an overpass, sending cars and terrified people plummeting. Another Nomu with acid-spitting capabilities began melting the foundations of a hospital. A third, a winged beast, simply plucked a bus full of people from the street and began flying it towards the bay. All for One spread his arms wide. "Save them, hero! Show them the power of your new godhood! But can you be everywhere at once? Can you save the people on the bridge without letting the hospital crumble? Can you catch the bus before the children inside it drown? Let's see your divine calculus. Which lives are worth more?" It was a cruel, impossible test. The ultimate trolley problem, scaled up to a city-wide disaster. He was trying to force Deku to make a choice, to sacrifice some to save others, to become the cold, logical machine the HPSC wanted him to be. Deku's mind, his terrible and perfect mind, was already screaming the probabilities at him. Overpass collapse, 87 casualties. Hospital foundation failure, 312 casualties, including bedridden patients. Bus submersion, 42 casualties, mostly children. Optimal triage, sacrifice the overpass. The casualty count is lowest. The cold logic of it was a poison in his veins. He felt the vestiges, their combined tactical experience, agreeing with the assessment. Sacrifice the few to save the many. It was the harsh reality of hero work. For a moment, he almost succumbed. He almost became the god All for One wanted him to be. Then he saw it. Through his enhanced senses, he could see the face of a little girl pressed against the window of the falling bus, her eyes wide with terror. He could hear the desperate cries of a man trapped in his car on the collapsing overpass. He could feel the frantic heartbeat of a nurse trying to evacuate a newborn from the crumbling hospital. Finite lives. Precious, individual, irreplaceable lives. And in that instant, something inside him snapped. Not in anger, but in defiance. He rejected the premise. He rejected the choice. He rejected the cold calculus of gods and monsters. No! The word was a sonic boom that shattered every window in a 10-block radius. It was not a word of anger. It was a declaration of principle. He looked at All for One, his eyes burning with a light that was no longer just power, but pure, unadulterated will. You think this is a game of numbers? You think you can break me by forcing me to choose, but you're wrong. His aura exploded, the golden-green light bathing the entire ward in its glow. My answer is not some. My answer is all of them. What happened next was not a battle. It was a miracle. He didn't move from the plaza. He became the plaza. He became the city. His consciousness, powered by the infinite engine of the singularity, expanded, splitting into 1,000 different streams. Golden-green energy flared from his body. Black whip, no longer mere tendrils but a torrent of solidified creation, erupted from him. An immense, city-block-wide net of starlit energy materialized beneath the collapsing overpass, catching the falling cars as gently as a mother catching a child. The net didn't just hold, it solidified into a temporary ramp, guiding the vehicles safely to the ground. Simultaneously, a portion of his aura detached, forming a semi-sentient bolt of pure kinetic energy. It streaked across the city, guided by his will and the unerring precision of danger sense, and struck the winged Noma. The bolt didn't kill it. It was a targeted strike, a divine nerve pinch, that caused the creature to spasm and release the bus. The bus began to fall, but it was immediately caught by a second, independently acting black whip construct, a massive, gentle hand that lowered it safely to an empty street below. At the same time, Deku's own body, still in the plaza, pointed a finger at the hospital. A beam of focused, controlled energy shot out. It didn't strike the acid-spitting Noma, it struck the ground around the hospital's foundation. The earth did not shatter, it was transmuted. In seconds, the melting concrete and soil were encased in a crystalline, diamond-hard substance that buttressed the entire building, stabilizing it completely. He was using float not just on himself, but on debris, lifting dangerous rubble out of harm's way. He was using danger sense not as a warning, but as a citywide battle management system, tracking every civilian, every threat, every falling piece of masonry. He was everywhere at once, a one-man army, a one-man rescue corps, a one-man god whose divinity was fueled not by cold logic, but by radical, absolute empathy. On the skyscraper, All for One's smile had vanished. His jaw was slack. This was not what he had expected. He had expected a choice. He had expected a struggle. He had expected his opponent to be bound by the laws of physics, by the limitations of a single consciousness. The boy wasn't choosing. He was cheating. He was rejecting the rules of the game, and rewriting them on the fly. He wasn't playing God. He was redefining the job description. With all immediate civilian threats neutralized in the span of 30 seconds, Deku's full attention, a terrifying and absolute thing, finally fell upon All for One. He didn't shout. He didn't power up. The tempest of his aura calmed, condensing around him until he was a figure of quiet, incandescent rage. My turn, he said, his voice quiet, but it carried across the ward, a promise of retribution. He took a single step, and the space between the plaza and the skyscraper folded. He was no longer there. He was here. He stood before All for One, their faces inches apart, the hero's eyes blazing with the light of 1,000 suns, the villains reflecting that light back in stunned, utter disbelief. All for One reacted on pure instinct, unleashing a torrent of quirks, force multipliers, impact reversal, air cannons, rivet stabs, a combination that would have disintegrated All Might in his prime. They struck Deku and vanished. The energy was not blocked or deflected. It was absorbed, nullified, unmade. His body, his aura, was a singularity in more than one sense. The laws of physics broke against his skin. He looked at the barrage of lethal quirks with a kind of weary disappointment. Then, he raised his hand. He didn't punch. He simply, opened his palm. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. All for one felt a pressure from all sides, a force that didn't crush but simply held. A cage of pure, golden green energy, woven from the fabric of reality itself, materialized around him. It was a perfect, inescapable sphere of light. He tried to activate a teleportation quirk, but the cage seemed to negate the very concept. He was a bug in a jar of solidified spacetime. Deku looked at the man who had tormented generations, the source of so much pain and suffering. The monster who had tried to break his spirit, and he felt nothing. No satisfaction. No hatred. Just a profound, quiet finality. You wanted to see what a god could do, Deku said, his voice devoid of all heat, the battle already won. You were wrong. You just saw what a hero can do when he refuses to let anyone fall. The sphere of light around All for One constricted slightly, and then lifted into the air, a new, captive star in the sky above Kamino. The challenge was over. The god had answered, and his answer had terrified the man who asked the question more than any show of force ever could have.